Hello and welcome to today's Daily Green News podcast. Today's podcast looks at fuel poverty. A little while ago I gave a presentation in Westminster regarding fuel poverty and I put together an action plan, but what went into it was about 3 to 4 months of research into fuel poverty. And the problem became quite fascinating to me. The presentation that I gave was 45 minutes, so what I'll do here, I'll basically talk you through the presentation, but keep it a lot shorter, hopefully about 10-15 minutes. In my presentation I chose this opening statement, and later it will become clear why. But at the time, it's the current Energy Minister that gave this quote, but at the time of making this quote, he was the Shadow Energy Minister, which was in March of 2010. And basically, Charles Hendry, the then Shadow Energy Minister, stated, "It is clear that it, and by this he means the government, cannot meet its targets for eradicating fuel poverty from vulnerable households by 2010, and it looks as though its targets for total eradication by 2016 is heading the same way." Basically, he states that we've missed the 2010 target, and the 2016 target we're most likely going to miss. Well, we're going to look into that today, what's happening with fuel poverty. For those of you that aren't aware what fuel poverty is, a household that is spending more than 10% of its income on fuel for heating is said to be in fuel poverty. It affects mainly the elderly, younger children and the disabled and long-term sick. Because this presentation was aimed at social housing providers, it also pointed out that the majority of fuel-poor households are in social housing. Fuel poverty is a trap. It occurs a lot more in older homes because obviously the thermal efficiency of those properties is a lot less. So what generally happens, you've got a colder home, most likely because because a household has to spend about 10% of their income. That means that most likely that household will be a lower income household, which means they're in an old cold home. They need more fuel to heat that property, which means the fuel bills will be a lot higher. Because most likely this household will be in fuel poverty, they will have concerns about debt. So one of the first things they'll do is they'll reduce the heating capacity, i.e. turn the heating down. Especially in older homes, in the winter they probably need more heat to keep the fabric from deteriorating. So once that property needs that protection the most, they turn the heating down, which means the fabric starts to deteriorate. And obviously this is over a long period of time, so it then once the fabric starts to deteriorate, it takes even longer to heat that property. As I started off with that quote where I basically said that the then Shadow Energy Minister and the current Energy Minister stated that that we've missed the 2010 target of eradicating fuel poverty from vulnerable households, and it looks like we're going to miss the 2016 target. That was part of the quote, and the full quote was this. The government still does not have a coherent strategy to avoid more misery for the millions of households struggling to pay their energy bills. There are initiatives, and I'll look at them after this, but there is no clear strategy on how we're going to eradicate fuel poverty. It was a statement set out, it was a plan to eradicate it, but it was a statement, but there's no clear strategy. The only thing we have is the initiatives, and it's different to have an initiative and a plan. I also think, and we're going to look at this later, that at the time when they came out with this statement, they didn't need a clear strategy because fuel poverty was dropping. But as we see later in this presentation, fuel poverty is rising. So I think now it becomes clear that there hasn't been a strategy, and what are we going to do? As I say, there are initiatives. The most famous ones currently are the Carbon Emission Reduction Target and the Community Energy Saving Programme. The problem with all these initiatives is that they are regressive in their nature. CERT and CESP are funded by the big six energy suppliers like British Gas, E.ON, etc. They have to pay for this. So what happens, even though these two initiatives cater for vulnerable households, especially CERT, they have a 40% target to fund improvements to vulnerable households. But because the big six have to pay for this, this simply becomes a levy onto a fuel bill. So who does that impact more? the fuel poor households because they're struggling to pay their bills, and any increase is felt much more by them than your middle and high income earners. So all these initiatives are regressive in their nature. They don't benefit the fuel poor, and those taxes just impact a lot harder on them than any other group, really. Now, there is a new kid on the block. There's a lot of talk about it, the Green Deal. From what I can see, this is currently how it's probably going to work. A third party, either an energy supplier or a private investor, will provide upfront investment costs to install renewable technology. That household has therefore reduced energy consumption, and from that reduced energy consumption they have savings, and they will pay the private investor back from the savings that they have from installing the renewable technology. This can be paid back over, I believe, about 25 years. It's a good idea, but from a strictly fuel poor point of view, as we've seen earlier, fuel poor households will have a tendency to underheat their homes. One of the first things they'll do to save money is turn their heating down. So once you install renewable technology in this house, they will heat their property normally, and they won't have the savings that a middle income or higher income household will have. Also, if you are a private investor, you're probably a lot less likely to be interested in fuel poor households because of the financial risk they might pose for paying you back. So again, we've got an initiative here, but it doesn't benefit the fuel poor. Now, the Green Deal isn't set in concrete, isn't set in stone yet, so there's no, there might be some changes to it, but from what we can currently see, it probably isn't that effective at dealing with fuel poverty. Now, what has been successful is the Warm Front scheme. Basically, it was run by Ego. They had a bit of a monopoly on this, and they run a very effective scheme in dealing with fuel poverty, although some people might disagree with this. Out of all the schemes, I think it is the most effective, and basically there's a grant up to £3,500. It looks at vulnerable households, and they upgrade the property to the tune of £3,500, so they'll do a whole house approach, so they'll look at heating, insulation, etc., etc. And it's up to £3,500, but if they want to install renewable, they can even stretch that to £6,500. Unfortunately, we've recently had a budget review, and the budget for Warm Front has been slashed. So this financial year, 2010-2011, we will still have £345 million, but it's then completely slashed to £110 million by 2011 and 2012. And by the final financial year of 2012 and 2013, we have £100 million, which is a lot less than originally was set out for it. After this, it is expected to be taken up by the Green Deal, which will then deal with fuel poverty. But as we've looked at that, there are still a few questions. How are they going to deal with fuel poverty? Now, these are the latest figures that I got from DEC on fuel poverty. They will always be about a couple of years behind because they have to collate all the data, do quality assurance checks, get the data from the English Housing Survey and then run those checks. So they will always be about a year and a half behind. The Fuel Poverty Action Group currently thinks that at the moment there's 4.6 million people in fuel poverty, or sorry, 4.6 million households. So as you can see, as I said earlier, fuel poverty, once they said they were going to eradicate it by 2016, I don't think they particularly needed a strategy, because as you can see, it started to drop down from 1996 to 2003. It dropped massively, and we had an all-time low of, I think, 1.2, 1.3 million by 2003. Since then, it's been creeping up, and as I said, they currently estimate it's 4.6 million households in fuel poverty. So we're pretty much back to where we started, and we're not that far off 2016. So we're also going to look at the future here. But as you can see, fuel poverty is a big problem. The biggest cause in the rise in fuel poverty is electricity prices. Since 2003, 2004, they've gone up by 125%, dipping all those households that were on the border of fuel poverty back into fuel poverty. And here you can see that. And you can see that every single form of energy has gone up. be it gas, electricity, heating oils or coal, all of them have gone up. And the indication is that this will continue to rise. On top of the normal prices for energy rises, there is also a new energy infrastructure to pay for in the next 10 to 20 years. The estimate is that this will cost around 150 billion, although we might creep up to 200 billion. This price, or this will be paid for by, a lot of this will be paid for by consumers. So the chance of energy prices coming down is very slim. Ofgem has run Project Discovery, in which they've had 4 models of analysis, or 4 different models. No. Okay. On top of the energy prices going up, there's also an energy infrastructure which has to be paid for. We think it's estimated that that will cost around 150 billion, although some think it might even go up to 200 billion. What that means is that the prices of energy will continue to rise in the next decade. Ofgem have run a project called Project Discovery, in which they run 4 possible scenarios and projected that into the future of what might happen to energy prices. And in every single scenario, the price of energy, of any form of energy, will go up massively. I think the best case scenario was a 25% increase. So what that means for fuel poverty is that fuel poverty, it is a big problem now, but if we don't watch it, it's going to be a massive problem going forward. And again, that 2016 target seems rather unrealistic without a strategy. I want to point out the root causes of fuel poverty. They're obviously the level of household income. If a household is on lower income, they're much more at risk from fuel poverty because of that 10% margin that they have to pay to heat their home. And then the second part is energy efficiency of the home. There's a big part to play. If you lose heat and energy and therefore money through your walls, then obviously that's not ideal. So again, if you would do something about the thermal efficiency of the home, you would limit one of the factors of fuel poverty. And then the last one is energy prices, which we've already looked at, which is hard to control. But if prices keep increasing, more and more households will creep into fuel poverty. There is also one thing to bear in mind for stockholders, which is a 4th but a lot smaller driver of fuel poverty. It's under occupancy. If you've got a single person living in a 5-bedroom detached Victorian property, that person will have to spend proportionally a lot more of their income heating their property than when that person would live in a single or double bedroom flat. It is something to bear in mind, especially if you're a householder, a stockholder, and you place people into accommodation. It is something that you have to bear in mind for fuel poverty. I don't want to end this presentation on a negative, so I also want to point out some of the benefits of tackling fuel poverty. Especially once councils and local authorities start tackling fuel poverty, we believe that they'll improve the local economic activity, particularly in deprived areas, i.e. once you start upgrading properties, and that household will have savings from the measures installed. That money that they'll save will find its way back into the local economy. We also believe that once you start doing this, you help creating the green jobs, and there's a lot spoken about that lately. I think Chris Huhne said that he thinks the Green Deal will create 100,000 new jobs. So again, that's a positive spin on it. And then finally, once you start improving properties, once you start installing renewables, etc., you'll also reduce carbon emissions. Yeah, I think I want to conclude this show by saying fuel poverty is a big problem now, and if we don't watch it, it's going to be a massive problem going forward. And there are some real benefits on tackling fuel poverty. I hope today's presentation's been informative. If you have any questions, send us an email or Twitter us.